"Sir, I need to see your ticket for verification." The voice, sharp as steel, cut through the crowded boarding hall, slicing through the hum of conversation and the rhythmic roll of suitcases on the floor. Every head turned toward the man standing at the entrance to Skybridge Airlines' first-class cabin. He didn't speak for several seconds, only tightened his grip on the ticket in his hand, a boarding pass printed with the name Jordan Ellis Seat, Suite 1 of First Class. His gaze wasn't angry. It carried the calm of someone far too familiar with the way the world looked at him, as though he didn't belong there. In front of him, Kara Whitman, the chief flight attendant, tilted her head slightly, her gloved hand frozen mid-air. The light gleamed off her crimson nails, making the gesture look like a warning signal. "You're saying you have a first-class ticket," she pressed, drawing out the words, unable to hide the skepticism in her voice. Jordan replied softly, yet every word was precise. "I'm not saying I do. I have it." A ripple of whispers spread through the line. A few phones lifted lenses, quietly recording. A middle-aged man shook his head. A young woman squinted, eager for a scene. In a world where everything could become content, humiliation could be filmed, brightened, edited, and uploaded in slow motion. Jordan remained where he was, tall, composed. The reflection on his thin sunglasses showed the crowd itself, their unease, their suspicion, and the faint fear that surfaced whenever familiar power was challenged. "Do you really think I should just let anyone into the VIP cabin just because they claim to have a ticket?" Kara said, her tone rising. "Skybridge's first class isn't for just anyone. That phrase isn't for just anyone, sliced through the air like a thin blade." Jordan glanced at the 1A sign behind her and said slowly, "My ticket says it clearly, and I paid in full." For a moment, his voice lost its calm and turned cold, the sound of someone who had been doubted too many times, not because of what he had done, but because of who he was. Behind him, the line of passengers grew restless. Some sighed, others angled their phones toward Kara, waiting for a viral moment. The attendant didn't move. "Where did you buy this ticket?" she asked, more like an interrogator than someone in customer service. "Directly from Skybridge's website," Jordan answered. 3 days ago." But Kara wasn't listening, or perhaps she chose not to. She gave a quick glance to her colleague, Ben Foster, standing near the boarding counter. "Call operations," she said under her breath. "Tell them we have a suspicious passenger in first class." Suspicious, Jordan repeated, letting out a quiet laugh. "Because I'm wearing a suit, or because I'm not white enough to match the seat?" The air thickened instantly. Someone cleared their throat. A man behind muttered, "God, not this again." But no one stepped forward. No one wanted to get involved. Jordan took a slow breath, forcing his heartbeat steady. He refused to lose his composure, not in front of them, not in front of the world watching. He had been that kid in South Atlanta, followed by mall security, just for standing near a leather goods display. He had been the college student stopped 3 times in one day to show his ID. And now, as the chairman of North Star Holdings, the man who had just spent hundreds of millions of dollars acquiring this airline, he was once again being asked to prove he was worthy of seat 1A. The irony wasn't in the insult itself, but in how ordinary, how routine it was polished, patient, and systemic. Kara lifted the intercom phone and spoke briskly. "This is Kara Whitman, on flight SB219. I need to verify a first-class passenger name, Jordan Ellis. Possible invalid transaction." Then she flashed a half-smile toward the passenger, recording her as if proud of following procedure. While she waited for a response from the other end, a man in a grey Armani suit, approached Gregory Stanton, a frequent first-class traveller. "Good morning, Kara," he greeted, his tone familiar. Instantly her demeanour transformed, a bright smile, a sweet voice, a glass of champagne in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Stanton. Your seat 1B is ready, and here's your champagne. 2 ice cubes, just as always." Jordan watched silently, not angry, just thoughtful. Every detail etched into his memory, the way her smile could switch on and off in an instant, the way she treated him as a glitch in a system that needed fixing. The voice from the operations line came through her headset. "No issue in the system. Passenger name and ticket are valid." But Kara refused to let go. "Strange," she said, feigning concern. "Might be a data glitch. Sometimes third-party transactions cause errors." "There's no third party," Jordan replied. "I purchased directly paid with my company card." "Would you like to see the receipt?" Ben Foster stepped forward, forming a subtle barrier between Jordan and the cabin door. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, though. His tone made it sound less like a question and more like a statement. Jordan looked at both of them, then at the crowd around him. Every face said the same thing: "You don't belong here." And in that moment, he understood this flight to New York wasn't just another trip. It was a test fate had already prepared. Jordan pulled out his phone, not to film openly, but to record quietly, holding it low. His voice was calm, deliberate. "I just want to board my flight. If anyone thinks otherwise, they'll need more than suspicion to stop me." Kara folded her arms, narrowing her eyes. "You're not boarding this plane until I've verified everything. That's procedure. Or prejudice." The question cut through the air, silencing the crowd. In that heavy stillness, Jordan heard the click of a camera shutter. Someone had just captured the moment. He knew that within hours the photo might spread across social media. But he wasn't afraid. He only thought, if this is how they treat me, the man who owns the airline, then how do they treat those without power, without a name? Jordan inhaled, exhaled slowly. He was no longer the boy thrown out of stores. He was the man capable of rewriting the story from the first-class cabin, right here at this airport. Outside the glass wall, the Los Angeles morning light reflected off the body of the sky bridge 787, the great steel bird carrying hundreds of people, and one confrontation about to shake an entire industry. The first-class door remained closed, but Jordan knew that when it opened, the world would never be the same again. The air around the boarding gate had grown so heavy that people could almost hear their own heartbeats. Each passing second felt like a wire pulled tighter, waiting for someone to press the detonator. Kara Whitman still stood there, chin slightly lifted, her voice now carrying not only suspicion, but also the small sense of authority granted by the uniform and the name tag on her chest. "You say you have a first-class ticket, but I've never seen your name on our VIP list," she said, forcing a polite smile that still sliced like silk-wrapped steel. "There must be a system error." Jordan raised an eyebrow, his gaze calm but cold as ice. "I don't need to be on your VIP list to sit in the seat I paid for. I don't need privilege. I need fairness." From behind Gregory Stanton, the man in the expensive grey suit spoke up impatiently. "Good God, are we really going to stand around for this nonsense? If his ticket isn't valid, just move him to economy. People like that shouldn't delay an entire flight." The phrase "people like that" dropped from his mouth and echoed clearly in the silence that followed. Some passengers winced, others nodded in agreement. Jordan heard every word. They hit him like pebbles he had long since learned to swallow rather than throw back. He looked directly at Gregory. People like what Sir Gregory shrugged, lowering his voice, but not his smirk. I'm just saying there are some people who don't belong in certain places. The tension in the air cracked. A woman waiting nearby leaned toward her friend and whispered, "He has no idea who he's talking to." But Jordan only smiled, a restrained, chilling smile. He had heard words like that 100 times before. Only today the world was recording every second. At the boarding counter, Ben Foster glanced around, noticing every eye fixed on them. He whispered to Kara, "Maybe we should just let him board, Kara." "Everyone's filming this." "No, Kara, cut in sharply. If I let him on and the ticket's fake, I'll lose my job. I can't take that risk." She didn't say the rest, that she didn't want to be criticized for letting someone like him sit among passengers like Gregory Stanton. Jordan exhaled slowly, fighting down the anger rising inside. In his mind, he could still hear the clicking of Laura Chen's keyboard, the Skybridge Vice President of Operations. Just last night, they had discussed service culture in their online meeting. She had said, Skybridge is striving to become the airline of respect. He almost laughed to himself. Respect, it was being crushed right here at the very door of the plane. Kara picked up the intercom again, her voice trembling slightly, though she tried to sound authoritative. "Call Captain Grant. I need him to come here." Minutes later, Captain Edward Grant appeared, tall, silver-haired and commanding. His uniform was pressed to perfection, each stride radiating the confidence of a man who had flown for 30 years, and believed experience gave him the right to judge. "What's going on?" His voice was rough, deep, and full of authority. Kara immediately reported, "Captain, this passenger claims to have a first-class ticket, but his name isn't on the VIP list. I suspect an irregular transaction." Grant turned his gaze to Jordan. It was brief, but it carried every bias he needed to communicate. "Where did you buy this ticket?" he asked. "Directly from Skybridge's website," Jordan replied, still calm. "What card did you use?" Jordan frowned slightly. "Is that relevant to whether my ticket is valid?" In suspicious cases, Grant said slowly, "Every detail matters. There's been a rise in fraud lately, especially with premium fares. We can't just let anyone into first class." From behind, Gregory Stanton interrupted again, his tone sharp with irritation. "Captain, can we please end this? I have an important meeting in New York. One uncooperative passenger shouldn't delay everyone else." The phrase "everyone else" cut like a second blade. Monica Reed, a woman seated nearby, had heard enough. She stood her eyes sharp as glass. "Captain, I've been watching the whole time. This man hasn't caused any trouble. He's only trying to prove his ticket is valid. If he were white, this would have been over 10 minutes ago." Grant spun toward her, his tone heavy as iron. "Ma'am, I'm ordering you to sit down immediately. Interfering with the crew's duties is a violation of aviation security regulations. The violation is yours," Monica shot back, "for treating a paying customer unfairly." The boarding area fell silent again. The air grew thick with tension. Some people started recording, others looked away, afraid of meeting the truth in Jordan's eyes, in Kara's, in the captain's. Grant pulled out his phone and spoke curtly, "Security to gate B12. We have a non-compliant passenger causing disruption." Jordan closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was no trace of hurt, left only fire. He reached for his phone, turned on the camera, and held it low, the small recording light glowing. "All right," he said softly but firmly. "If you want to continue this, I'll record everything. For my legal team." Kara froze. "Are you threatening us?" Jordan answered, his tone low but solid as stone. "No. I'm protecting myself." His voice wasn't loud, but each word struck like a hammer on steel. The way he said it silenced everyone. Even Grant, who had seemed so sure of his authority, hesitated for a brief moment. Jordan's phone vibrated a message from Laura Chen. The integration meeting between North Star and Skybridge for Monday morning has been confirmed. "Jordan, I hope your speech inspires a culture of respect." He smiled, faintly a sad smile. Maybe the speech has already started, he thought. Outside on the tarmac, the Los Angeles sunlight glinted off the airplane's body, gleaming like a silver arrow. Inside the terminal, a black man still had to prove he had the right to sit in the seat he paid for. Grant hung up his phone and said to Kara, "Call security now. If he doesn't leave voluntarily, we'll have him removed. That's my decision." His voice carried the kind of authority that had never been challenged in his entire life. Jordan lifted his head, meeting the captain's eyes, not as a humiliated passenger, but as a man about to show them what true power meant. He didn't yet know that within minutes, one phone call would flip the entire situation, and the very people judging him would soon face a storm of their own making. But in that moment, under hundreds of watching eyes, Jordan took a deep breath, lifted his chin and said quietly, just loud enough for Kara to hear, "You're opening the wrong door, Kara, and when it closes, you'll never walk through it again." Light flickered in his eyes, cold at the surface, yet warm deep within. Outside, the engines began to roar to life, and the world had no idea that a revolution was already beginning right there at the door of first class. The thud of Captain Edward Grant's shoes echoed along the aircraft floor as he approached each step, carrying 3 decades of authority, the kind of power that had made countless people lower their eyes with a single glance. But today that authority was about to be tested in a way he had never imagined. When he appeared at the entrance to first class, the air already tense seemed to freeze. Kara exhaled in relief, as if rescue had arrived, and hurried to report. "Captain, this passenger insists he has a first-class ticket. I checked his name isn't on our VIP list. I suspect an irregular transaction." Grant looked Jordan up and down, his pale blue eyes narrowing with a proprietary assessment, and in an instant Jordan could feel the judgment no proof required, no logic, needed only the color of his skin. "Where did you buy the ticket?" Grant asked, voice low and cold. "Directly on Skybridge's website 3 days ago." Jordan answered crisply, standing straight, phone at his hip, recording. Grant tilted his head, eyes probing. "Which credit card?" "Excuse me," I asked, "which card you used to pay?" Beneath the veneer of procedure, the question was simply another way of asking whether he truly had the money. Jordan gave a short, incredulous smile. "How is that relevant to the validity of my ticket, Captain?" Grant folded his arms, stepped closer, his tone deep with implied threat. "When I'm responsible for the safety of more than 200 passengers, every detail matters. I've seen enough fraud to know when something isn't right." Jordan didn't step back. "So your experience entitles you to judge a passenger's integrity by their appearance?" Grant frowned, head-cocked voice, sharp as a blade. "I have no bias. I'm doing my job." Yet the emphasis on "I made it clear he trusted his own power more than any principle." Behind them, Gregory Stanton, the man in the expensive suit, lost patience, flicking his hand with a raised, biting voice. "Enough. If he doesn't have a valid ticket, remove him. We have real business in New York. No one has time for this." "Real business," Jordan repeated, eyes flashing like metal in sunlight. Gregory waved him off, smug. "You know exactly what I mean." A voice rose from seat 2. F. Monica Reed, who had watched everything shot to her feet. No, he doesn't, because the way you say real business means it belongs to certain people only, and the rest of us should know our place. Right. The cabin erupted in whispers. Grant swung toward Monica, his words striking like a hammer. "Ma'am, sit down immediately. Interfering with crew duties can lead to arrest." Monica didn't move. "Then arrest me," she said, eyes locked. "But at least look in the mirror while you do it." Grant tightened his grip on the brim of his cap and turned back to Jordan. "Mr. Ellis, let me be clear. I am the captain of this flight. Under regulations of the Federal Aviation Administration, I have the authority to deny boarding to any passenger I deem a security risk. A risk," Jordan asked, his voice trembling with anger. "I'm standing here in a suit with a valid ticket, and you call me a risk? We act on experience and procedure," he replied. "Procedure repeated like a shield for discrimination." Jordan breathed deeply, fighting for composure. Anger rose, but beneath it was a sorrow familiar to a man who had climbed to the summit and still had to prove his worth in every glance. He opened his phone and texted Marcus Hale, General Counsel of North Star Holdings, Initiate Conduct Logging Protocol. "Skybridge Flight SB219, prepare legal response." By the time he put the phone away, Kara had stepped aside to call the center. "Security, this is Kara Whitman at Gate B12. Non-compliant passenger. Immediate assistance requested." Jordan lifted his head and looked around, every gaze fixed on him, curiosity, pity, prurient interest. Someone murmured, "He's recording, this will be online." A young man whispered, "If I were him, I'd just leave." He did not leave. He knew something larger was unfolding, a moment that would define not only him, but an entire system. "What are you trying to do here?" Grant asked, with a curl of disdain. "'Cause I've seen fish for views." Jordan answered slowly, "I don't need views. I need the truth." The first-class doorway remained open. No one spoke. The public address system announced other departures, blending with the steady hum of the jet engines outside. Then, Sergeant Paul Jenkins, tall in a security uniform, arrived with 2 officers, the metal sheen of his badge catching light across Kara's face. "What's the situation?" he asked. Grant pointed at Jordan. "This individual is refusing crew instructions and obstructing the flight." Jordan turned to him, voice level. "Officer, I have a valid ticket. I have presented my ID, my confirmation code, everything. I'm being told to leave because of suspicion." Jenkins frowned. "The captain has final say on passengers, sir." Grant crossed his arms, pronouncing sentence. "You have 2 choices: disembark voluntarily, or we will remove you." For the first time, Jordan met his gaze fully, and Grant involuntarily shifted a step back. There was no fear in those eyes, only the power of someone who knows exactly where he stands, no matter who denies it. "Are you sure you want to do that?" Captain Jordan asked quietly. Grant gave a thin smile. "I've done this for 30 years, Mr. Ellis. I know what I'm doing." Jordan's reply was softer, but heavy as iron. "No, you don't. Because if you did, you'd stop before making a mistake the entire industry will pay for." Grant arched a brow. "Is that a threat?" No, Jordan said with a small nod. "It's a prediction." In the lounge area, phones lifted again, a constellation of tiny red lights blinking to life. The world was watching, and it was about to witness the collapse of a false empire of certainty, right here on the tarmac. "Security escort him out," Grant ordered. Jenkins stepped forward, hand settling lightly at his belt, a practiced movement that warned and prepared at once. Kara held her breath. Gregory Stanton leaned back, a satisfied smile spreading. Monica Reed gripped her phone, fingers trembling but still filming. Jordan stood unmoving, the light from the window settling on his shoulders like a faint crown, as if the sky itself were illuminating the eye of the storm. "Before you put a hand on me," he said, voice low and clear, "make sure you know who I am." Grant's lip curled. "I don't need to know. You're just a passenger." Jordan answered, a blade-thin smile crossing his lips. "No, Captain. I'm the man acquiring this airline." Grant faltered, stunned for a beat, then scoffed. "Anyone can say that. Take him." And just as Sergeant Jenkins's hand touched Jordan's shoulder, the phone in Grant's pocket buzzed. The priority tone reserved for top-level calls rang out. The screen showed the name Laura Chen, Vice President of Operations. He answered, and Laura's voice cut through like steel. "Edward, stop everything immediately. The man you are attempting to remove from the aircraft is the chairman of North Star Holdings, the new owner of Skybridge." The cabin held its breath. Grant froze, his hand trembling, the phone slipping from his fingers and hitting the floor with a dry, final clack, the sound of power collapsing. And Jordan simply looked ahead, eyes as calm as the sky before a storm. He knew the game had changed. Captain Edward Grant's phone hit the floor, spun a few times, then lay still with the screen still lit, carrying Laura Chen's voice, cold and precise, through the speaker. "I will repeat this. You are trying to remove Chairman Jordan Ellis from the aircraft of the very company he owns. North Star Holdings completed the acquisition of Skybridge Airlines last week. Every employee, including you now, reports to him." The words split the air like a bolt of lightning. Everyone froze. For a few seconds, no one breathed. No one moved, only the far-away thrum of engines outside the fuselage, a dirge for arrogance collapsing. Kara Whitman stood stunned, lips parted, unable to make a sound. Ben Foster stepped back, eyes wide, as if watching a daytime nightmare. Gregory Stanton blinked, the sneer that had curled his mouth, congealing, then melting into panic. Only Jordan Ellis did not move. He bent or picked up the phone, as gently as if retrieving a piece of dignity thrown to the floor, placed it into Captain Grant's hand, and said quietly, loud enough for all to hear, "Now do you understand why I asked if you were sure you wanted to do that?" Grant did not answer. The face that had flushed with anger now drained white. His hand shook as though every vein in his body was screaming that his career had ended. Laura's voice continued in the handset, lower now but unequivocal. "Captain Grant, you are to leave the aircraft immediately. You and Chief Purser Whitman are suspended indefinitely effective right now. Legal will contact both of you." Kara broke into tears. Not loud sobs, but the strangled weeping of someone who realizes everything has fallen apart in a single breath. "I am sorry, I did not know," she said, through tears, voice shaking, clutching the edge of the counter, as if it were the only thing holding her up. Jordan looked at her. His gaze held no anger now, only a deep sadness, the sadness of someone who has seen this too many times. He spoke slowly and clearly, each word piercing the silence. "That is the problem, Kara. You did not know, because you never thought you needed to know. You believed you had the right to decide who gets to pass through this door based on a feeling." She bowed her head and covered her face. Grant tried to gather the last shreds of dignity, his voice ragged. "Mr. Ellis, I was following procedure. I did not intend," Jordan cut in calm, but edged like a paper knife. "You have 30 years of experience, do you not? 30 years to learn the difference between procedure and prejudice. Yet today you used that experience to humiliate a passenger, because you decided he did not belong here. Grant swallowed hard, his eyes reddening. I can change, sir. Give me a chance. You have had 30 years of chances, Jordan said, voice lowering, and you let them pass. He turned to Sergeant Paul Jenkins, who had stood off to the side, discomfort written across his face. Thank you for not escalating, officer. You and your team may stand down. Jenkins nodded quickly, relieved. Yes, sir. My pleasure. He led his colleagues out, leaving behind a cabin thick with the silence of regret. Jordan drew a long breath and looked around first class at the eyes and the still-raised phones recording every moment. He knew he was not speaking only to the people in this cabin, but to millions watching on a live stream. He stepped forward, voice steady and resonant like a declaration. What just happened here is not a simple personal mistake. It is a symptom of a disease rooted deep in the service industry, a disease that judges people by appearance. Every gaze locked on him. He continued low but firm. Skybridge does not just sell tickets, we sell an experience. And if that experience is humiliation, then every first-class seat in the world is worthless. Behind him, Monica Reed stood. She was the first to clap, slow, strong, insistent. The sound beat through the cabin like a wake-up drum. Another joined, then another. Soon all of first class was ringing with applause, mingled with the tight breaths of those holding back tears. Kara still stood there, hands clenched, mascara streaked. She stepped toward Jordan, voice shaking. I am sorry, truly. I thought I was doing the right thing. Jordan nodded once. I believe you did. But right cannot be something that is only right for a few. He gestured to Ben Foster, the only one who had held his composure. Ben, would you help the captain and Ms. Whitman off the aircraft? Ben nodded, eyes averted. As Grant walked away, step by slow step, head bowed, the cabin fell silent. The pilot's wings on his chest, once symbols of power and pride, now hung heavy, the weight of 3 decades of wrong turns. Jordan watched without gloating, only composed. He spoke softly, almost to himself. Justice does not need to be loud. It only needs to be seen. When the first-class door closed behind Grant and Kara, Jordan turned toward the flight deck. He saw First Officer Olivia Ramirez, a seasoned woman who had held her breath through it all. Olivia, he called. She stepped forward and stood at attention. Sir, he smiled, light but weighty. Congratulations. As of now, you are the captain of flight, SBI 219. I trust you will get everyone to New York safely. Olivia's eyes widened, filling with tears. Sir, I do not know what to say. Just say, take off, Jordan replied. The cabin rippled with a second round of applause, this time unforced. It was the sound of recognition, the sound of hope that something had shifted, not only on this plane, but in the minds of those who witnessed it. Jordan turned back toward his seat, yet did not sit. He looked around and said, I apologize for the delay. Every passenger here will be fully refunded and will receive a voucher for a future flight. And Ms. Reed, he looked to Monica Skybridge, will issue you a lifetime platinum card because you stood up when everyone else stayed silent. A third round of applause thundered stronger than the first 2, not for power, but for courage. Outside the window, the sun was dipping gold across the runway, washing the aircraft in a brilliant sheen like a beacon for a new era taking shape. Jordan sat at last, his gaze resting on the far sky. He felt no anger now, not even joy, only the sense that something necessary had just been cleansed. He murmured almost to himself, tomorrow, the world will talk about Skybridge. But today is the day fairness takes flight. The aircraft began to roll. The engines swelled, powerful and sure, like an overture to change. And on that flight, once a stage for prejudice, true power finally revealed itself, not the power to command, but the power of dignity restored. Outside the window, the Skybridge 787 rolled slowly toward the runway beneath the golden sunset of Los Angeles, but inside the air had yet to settle. Some were still trembling, some still filming, and every gaze remained fixed on the man sitting quietly in seat 1, a Jordan Ellis. He said nothing. His phone was still on the live stream, still running the number in the corner, climbing by the second, 500,000, 750,000, then past 1 million. Comments poured in. Is this real? He's the CEO of North Star. Oh my God, this airline is done for. Jordan glanced through a few lines, then turned off the screen. He didn't need to see more. He knew that in just a few short minutes, a media storm had been unleashed, and nothing could stop it now. Behind him, Monica Reed was still emotional. She leaned forward and whispered, "Thank you for not staying silent." Jordan turned, his expression softening. "No, I should be thanking you for speaking up when everyone else stayed quiet." Monica smiled faintly, then looked out the window. The sky outside seemed a little brighter. Meanwhile, at Skybridge headquarters in Dallas, the phones rang non-stop. Breaking news, there's a video going viral. Live stream from Flight S B219. The man in it is the new chairman. The executive floor was in chaos. Screens across the room lit up at once, displaying Jordan standing in the middle of the aircraft cabin, his voice calm, yet commanding. Justice doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to be seen. A young PR manager stammered, "Oh my God, more than 5 million people are watching us right now." Laura Chen, Vice President of Operations, stood in the center of the boardroom, her hand gripping her phone tightly. She knew this wasn't just a crisis, it was the moment that would define the future of the airline. "Prepare a statement," she ordered, "and issue a public apology the moment the plane lands." In the air, Captain Olivia Ramirez sat in the pilot's seat, her heart still pounding. Everything had happened too fast just hours ago. She had been the forgotten first officer, and now she was commanding the flight that symbolized change. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke through the intercom. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Ramirez. On behalf of the crew, I sincerely apologize for the delay. We'll be taking off shortly. Thank you for your patience." The simple words brought another wave of applause through the cabin. A few passengers wiped their eyes because everyone understood they were witnessing a moment that history might not record, but human hearts would never forget. The plane turned onto the runway, accelerating slowly. Jordan leaned back in his seat, eyes gazing through the glass. Los Angeles shrank beneath him, its lights blending into the fiery clouds of dusk. He closed his eyes, letting the sound of the roaring engines echo like the drums of destiny. In his mind, the scenes replayed Kara's face when she was suspended, Grant's pleading eyes, the passengers' applause, and Monica's trembling yet fearless voice. If he were white, this would have ended 10 minutes ago. Each moment felt like a needle, piercing deep into his heart, not from pain, but from the raw truth of it. He thought of his grandmother, Evelyn Ellis, the woman who had taught him his first lesson about dignity. You can lose money, you can lose chances, but never let anyone take away your self-respect, she had said, her hands gripping a mop handle at the Atlanta airport. Back then she had never flown, but every day she'd watched planes take off with hope in her eyes. Today, Jordan understood he was flying for her. Around the cabin, whispers began to ripple. "He's so composed. I can't believe the captain did that to the owner. This world's crazy, but I'm glad I got to see this." Gregory Stanton, the man who had angrily demanded Jordan be removed, now sat motionless, like a statue. He couldn't look at anyone. The screen of his phone still played the video. His own face, his own voice, the words "people like that don't belong here" replayed across thousands of accounts. Comments flooded in. "That's the guy from seat 1B. How does he even show his face at meetings now?" Gregory swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. He knew his career had just fallen from this flight. 3 hours later, Flight SB 219 touched down at New York's JFK Airport in total silence. No one rushed to stand. They simply watched as Jordan walked out each step, calm, polite, and deliberate. The cabin door opened, and the cold New York air swept in. A crowd of reporters was already waiting. News had traveled faster than the plane. "Mr. Ellis, were you discriminated against on your own airline? Are you planning to sue the crew? Do you have a message for the public?" Jordan stopped in the middle of the crowd, his eyes sweeping across the sea of microphones and cameras. He spoke slowly, his tone low but resonant. No one should be asked who they are before being treated like a human being. He bowed his head slightly, then walked away, leaving behind an airport on fire with chaos. Within 12 hours, the video on LinkedIn had surpassed 30 million views. The hashtags Skybridge Incident and Fly with Dignity dominated every platform. Major news outlets ran the headline, "CEO blocked from first class and makes an entire industry look in the mirror." Skybridge's stock plunged 8% at opening, but 6 hours later, after North Star Holdings announced a complete overhaul of corporate culture, the shares rebounded higher than before. That night in his Manhattan hotel room, Jordan sat by the window, overlooking the city's glowing skyline. His phone vibrated endlessly beside him, hundreds of messages from colleagues, executives, and friends. One of them was from Laura Chen. "Tomorrow the whole world will be watching us." "Are you ready?" he replied with just 3 words. "Always have been." Setting his phone down, he leaned back in the chair. From this high floor, the city stretched out like a sea of light, and he, the man who had been humiliated in public, had become a symbol of justice in the digital age. Jordan smiled faintly. Not the smile of victory, but the quiet one of someone who knew the real fight was only beginning. Because out there were still countless first-class doors closing on people who deserved to walk through. And he knew from this moment on, his mission was no longer just to run an airline, but to change how people treat one another, starting with the seat they choose to give. The next morning, New York was covered in a thin veil of mist. The city had not yet fully awakened, but across the massive LED screens in Times Square, the same image played on repeat, a 12-minute video from Flight SB 219. Jordan Ellis stood in the middle of the first-class cabin, his eyes calm, his voice steady, echoing through millions of devices around the world. Justice doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to be seen. The line was brief, but it became the headline of the morning. CNN, BBC, the New York Times, Forbes, and even entertainment networks all carried the same story. Skybridge Airlines had become the center of one of the largest discrimination scandals in the history of American aviation. In the 72nd floor conference room of North Star Holdings, an emergency meeting began. On the table screens displayed graphs, social media feeds, and live comments pouring in. Laura Chen spoke first, her tone calm but sharp as glass. "We're standing in the center of the storm, but I don't want to just put out fires. I want to rebuild," a middle manager asked nervously. "What about the two employees, Cara Whitman and Captain Grant? How should we proceed?" Laura turned to Jordan, who sat quietly at the head of the table. The morning light washed over his face, reflecting exhaustion mixed with resolve. He spoke slowly, his voice clear. "Termination for severe violation of anti-discrimination policy. No compensation, no extension." The room fell silent. He continued, "But I don't want to stop there. I want every Skybridge employee, from captain to ticket agent, to go through mandatory training on cultural awareness and unconscious bias. Not to protect our image, but to make them truly understand." A legal advisor nodded. "We could name it the Mitchell Protocol, an internal mandatory code." Jordan gave a faint smile. "No, call it the Ellis Initiative. Because I don't want justice to always carry someone else's name." That afternoon, the press release went out. It spread like lightning opening with the headline, "North Star Holdings launches $10 million campaign to end discrimination in aviation." The media called it the smartest move of the decade. Competing airlines panicked. Public relations experts hailed Jordan as a master of crisis control. But to him, all the praise was just noise. That evening, Jordan left the office late. On his way back to the hotel, an unexpected message appeared on his phone. "Sender Captain Edward Grant. I have no excuse. I've lost everything, my career, my reputation. But if you can help me understand why what I believed was procedure could be so wrong." Jordan stopped in the middle of the street, staring at the glowing screen. People hurried past, indifferent as the city itself. He replied with just one line. "When procedure is used to justify prejudice, it stops being law. It becomes a weapon." He turned off his phone, slipped his hands into his coat pockets, and kept walking. With every step, he could feel the invisible weight pressing on his shoulders. Justice, he knew, doesn't end when someone gets fired. It begins when we face the system that allowed it to happen. 2 days later in Washington, D.C., an emergency congressional hearing was convened on discrimination in commercial aviation. Jordan entered the Capitol building in a grey suit with no security, no entourage, only the phone that had witnessed everything. When he sat at the witness table, the national cameras focused squarely on his face. One senator asked, "Mr. Ellis, can you tell us why you chose not to act through your power, but instead chose to make the story public?" Jordan's deep voice filled the chamber. "Because if I had handled it quietly, this would have been just another termination. But when light shines on something, it becomes a mirror. And mirrors don't lie." The room fell silent. Another senator asked, "Then what solution do you propose? Transparency, oversight, education, and above all, dignity." He paused, locking eyes with the panel. No one should ever have to prove they deserve respect. The chamber erupted in applause. Many stood. The moment was replayed on television for an entire week. A week later, the United States Congress passed the Aviation Equality Act, the first law requiring every airline to conduct 4 anti-bias training sessions per year, with penalties of up to $10 million for each systematic violation. The press called it the Ellis Effect. Meanwhile, the fate of Grant and Cara was swiftly decided. Grant lost his pilot's license and was investigated after more than a dozen past complaints from black passengers over his 20-year career were uncovered. The files revealed a long trail of apologies without change, Kara lost her flight certification and left the aviation industry for good. She tried to find work with smaller carriers, but none would hire her. Several TV networks invited her for interviews. She refused them all. Rumor had it, she once broke down in a cafe, telling a friend, "Through tears, I thought I was doing the right thing." Now I understand. There are wounds you can't see, and I caused them myself. 3 weeks later, Skybridge Airlines returned to the skies. On every seatback screen, a new video played. Skybridge Airlines is committed to ensuring that every passenger in every seat is treated as a human being. The video ended with an image of a little brown-skinned girl looking up at the sky, smiling as a plane with the Skybridge logo soared overhead. It was an image Jordan had personally requested, one picture to replace every advertisement. That night, as he left the office, rain began to fall. Jordan stopped in the empty street, lifting his face toward the shimmering drops beneath the yellow light. He smiled and whispered softly, "Grandma, I kept my promise. No one will ever have to bow their head because of who they are." Somewhere above the clouds, he could almost hear her voice, light as the wind, warm as the touch of her hand long ago. "Fly, my boy. Fly for all of us." And amid the noise of New York, the man who had once been stopped at the door of first class had become the symbol of a new generation. A generation that understands justice isn't a triumphant victory, but an unending journey carried forward by hearts that refuse to bow. 3 months after the incident, America still had not stopped talking about Jordan Ellis. His name appeared everywhere, on newspaper covers, television shows, podcasts, even in university lectures on leadership ethics. They called him the man who made the sky look at itself. But for Jordan, the spotlight was not what he sought. He was simply tired. Tired of knowing that behind every bright headline, there were still countless people suffering from wounds no live stream could capture. One morning in Atlanta, the headquarters of North Star Holdings glowed with sunlight. On his desk lay dozens of envelopes, handwritten letters, not emails. Jordan opened them one by one, reading slowly. Some were from young flight attendants, saying that because of him, they now dared to dream of becoming captains. Others were from single mothers, sharing how, for the first time, their daughters were treated like real customers on a flight. Among the stack, there was a cream-colored envelope, the handwriting shaky. "Dear Mr. Ellis, I was an economy passenger on flight SB 219 that day. I recorded the entire event, but was too afraid to post it. I want to thank you. When you stood there not shouting, not fighting back, I realized calmness can sometimes be more powerful than anger. Thank you for teaching me that." Jordan folded the letter gently. The clumsy handwriting reminded him of his grandmother, Evelyn. He placed the letter in a glass frame beside her photograph. That same day, he had a special appointment, the first meeting with trainees in Skybridge's new cultural training program. The auditorium was brightly lit. The banner on the wall read, "Respect is not a privilege. It is the beginning of civilization." When Jordan walked in, hundreds of employees, pilots, flight attendants, engineers, ground staff, all stood up. The applause wasn't for his title, but for what he represented. He stepped onto the stage without a script, only carrying a small piece of paper with 3 lines written on it. Reflect. Listen. Act. His voice was low but carried through the entire hall. Someone once asked me why I forgave those who hurt me. I didn't forgive them because they deserved it. I forgave them because I didn't want to carry hatred as a burden. Our job is to fly, and resentment only makes us heavier. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the audience. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I haven't forgotten that morning, the look, the tone, the words, people like that. I remember to remind myself that change doesn't begin with apologies. It begins with action. The room fell silent. A young flight attendant raised her hand. "Mr. Ellis, if you were just an ordinary person, no power, no position, would you have still done the same?" Jordan smiled. "No one is born with power. I had only one choice, the choice not to stay silent. And that's something we all have." The applause returned stronger this time, spreading through the hall like a wave. After the session, when everyone had left, Captain Olivia Ramirez, the current pilot of Flight SB 219, approached him. "Mr. Ellis," she said, "thank you for the opportunity. That flight changed my entire life." Jordan nodded gently. "I didn't change you, Olivia. You changed yourself by standing for what was right." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Our next flight to New York, I'd like to invite you aboard, not in first class, but in the cockpit." Jordan laughed softly. "That sounds like an offer I can't refuse." A few days later, Jordan really did take his seat in the cockpit of that special flight. Olivia sat in the left seat, he sat in the right, not to fly, but simply to observe. Before takeoff, she turned to him. "Do you know why I chose this route? Because it was Skybridge's first flight route more than 40 years ago," he answered. She nodded. "And it's also the route my grandmother flew as a flight attendant in 1983. But she was never allowed in first class. Today I'm flying for her." Jordan looked at her, moved. Amid the rumble of the engine starting, he heard something familiar, the echo of women who had quietly kept the world aloft, from his own grandmother, Evelyn, to Olivia's, to thousands of others whose names no one remembered. The aircraft accelerated, lifting off, piercing through a thick layer of clouds. The morning light streamed through the cockpit windows, filling the small space with a soft, golden hue. Jordan spoke quietly. "My grandmother once told me, when you fly, don't forget to look down, because on the ground there are always people who still can't take off." Olivia smiled. "Maybe that's why we need people like you up here." He didn't answer, just looked out at the sky. The sun was rising, and among the clouds he felt a rare peace, as if the sky itself was whispering to him, "Keep flying, Jordan." When the plane landed in New York, the company's media team was already waiting. A banner hung by the gate read, "The Flight of Dignity, where every passenger is welcome." Jordan stepped out, smiling at the rows of passengers, his heart lighter. For the first time in years, he felt he no longer had anything to prove. A little black girl, about 8 years old, ran up holding a model Skybridge plane. She looked up at him with shining eyes. "You're the man from the video, right? You told people not to push others away, didn't you?" Jordan knelt, patted her head, smiling warmly. "No, sweetheart, I didn't teach anyone. I just reminded them of something they'd forgotten." The girl grinned and lifted the toy plane toward the sky. "I want to be a pilot," Jordan laughed. "And you will be if you fly with your heart." That night, as the city lights came on, Jordan stood alone on the rooftop of North Star's tower. The wind blew hard, carrying the distant hum of night flights. He closed his eyes and listened. In his mind, he could hear the voices of his grandmother, of Monica, of Olivia, of the thousands who had written letters of gratitude. All their voices blended together like a wordless symphony. And he understood the journey was far from over. Because justice is not a destination, It is the path dignity must walk, step by step, person by person. Jordan opened his eyes, gazed up at the star-filled sky, and whispered, "Tomorrow we fly again." But this time, not for profit for people. The sky answered with the glow of a plane, taking off a white trail stretching across the dark night, a promise written in light. The night wind carried the chill of March, tugging at the hem of Jordan Ellis's thin suit jacket as he stood on the rooftop of North Star Holdings headquarters. In the distance, planes carved through the dark sky, leaving white trails like humanity's signatures across the fabric of space. He watched one heading north and whispered softly, almost to himself, "Grandma, I've flown to the places you were never allowed to go." The moment was still almost sacred. Only the wind and the steady beat of his heart could be heard, the heartbeat of a man who had made the entire world rethink the meaning of justice. The next morning, North Star's offices were swarmed by reporters. From CNN to Reuters, everyone wanted an exclusive interview. But Jordan refused them all. He told his assistant, "We don't need to say more. What we need to do is prove it through action." And he did exactly that. Beneath a large banner reading, "Fly with Dignity," Jordan led the press conference, announcing Skybridge Airlines' global reform program. Behind him stood the new leadership team, people once overlooked by the old system, Captain Olivia Ramirez, Chief Engineer Andre Young, and the new Director of Customer Experience, Monica Reed. Today, Jordan began his voice, steady and clear. Before hundreds of microphones, we are not just launching a training program. We are rewriting the DNA of Skybridge from an airline into a mission. The room was silent. No one can change the world with a speech, but each of us can change someone's world by showing respect. That is why we are launching the Skybridge Humanity Initiative, a $10 million fund dedicated to training scholarships and community support for underrepresented groups in aviation. Cameras flashed in unison. A reporter called out, "Mr. Ellis, do you see this as a way to restore your company's image after the incident?" Jordan smiled, calm, yet firm. "No. Reputation is something money can buy. Dignity is not. This isn't public relations. It's responsibility." The statement instantly became a headline across major news outlets. Over the next 3 months, the movement spread farther than anyone expected. Major airlines like Aurora Air and Continental Pacific announced their own service culture reforms. The media called it the Ellis effect. But in Jordan's heart, he saw only one thing: seeds being planted, and his duty was to protect them from being swept away by time. One afternoon, while reviewing reports in his office, Jordan received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end trembled. "Mr. Ellis, this is Kara Whitman." The room fell silent. Jordan leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed. He hadn't expected her to call. Kara's voice was small, fragile. "I've lost everything. No one will hire me. I know I was wrong, but my mistake didn't just cost me my job. It made my son ashamed of his mother." There was a long pause. Jordan exhaled slowly. "What do you want from me, Kara? I'm not asking for my job back. I just wanted to say I understand now. I used to think prejudice was something only found in books, that it didn't exist in real life. But I became that prejudice. I just want to say, sorry, not because I lost something, but because I made someone else hurt." Her voice cracked at the end. Jordan said nothing for a while, staring out the window at the grey sky. "Do you know why I didn't sue you?" he asked. "No, I don't. Because I believe there are lessons that can only be learned through regret. And that's what you're learning now." Kara let out a sob. "I'll never forget." "Don't forget," Jordan said gently. "But turn your mistake into meaning. Teach others not to repeat it. If you want to start over, reach out to the Skybridge Foundation. They're hiring for their awareness education program. I'll let them know." The line went quiet. Then Kara began to cry. "Thank you. I don't deserve forgiveness, but thank you." "No one deserves forgiveness," Jordan said softly. "We only deserve the chance to become better." The call ended, leaving him in silence. For the first time in months, he felt something close to peace. That evening he visited JFK Airport, where Skybridge was opening its new pilot training center. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, just the first training session for 30 students from across the United States. They were young, full of energy, with every shade of skin and every accent imaginable. A young woman approached him, her eyes bright. "Mr. Ellis, my name is Ava. I'm Monica Reed's daughter. She tells me about you every day. I want to be a captain, like Captain Ramirez." Jordan smiled and bent down slightly. "The world needs more people like you, Ava. Remember, every seat is worthy, as long as you sit in it with self-respect." Ava grinned, her eyes sparkling with hope. Jordan looked around the classroom at the eager faces, and for a moment he saw himself 20 years earlier, a young man entering the aviation world with nothing but a small dream to fly without needing anyone's permission. When he left the center, it was late. The airport was quiet, the speakers humming softly in the distance. He stopped by the window overlooking the runway, where rows of guiding lights stretched endlessly like stars scattered across the ground. A Skybridge jet was taxiing, preparing for takeoff. The new logo gleamed on its body. "Skybridge, we all fly together." Jordan nodded. He had written that slogan himself, and now it was no longer just words on paper. It was a promise, illuminated by the very people whose lives he had touched. He watched as the plane lifted into the sky, slicing through the clouds, leaving behind a slender streak of light, a bridge between earth and heaven. In that glow, Jordan could almost hear his grandmother's voice, whispering beside his ear. "My boy, you didn't just fly. You taught the world to look at its own wings." Jordan closed his eyes and smiled. The sky responded with the fading roar of engines, a sound both powerful and tender, like the world itself saying thank you to the man who chose to stand tall in the storm. And he knew the journey was not over, because justice is not a destination. It is a flight, and as long as humanity keeps looking up at the sky, dignity will always have a path to take off. Dawn spread across Atlanta Airport, painting gold over the still wings of the planes. In that soft morning light, a brand new Skybridge A350 prepared for its maiden journey, the flight of dignity. On board, the entire crew consisted of graduates from the scholarship program founded by Jordan Ellis. Each carried a different story, yet all shared one dream to fly and to be treated as human beings. Jordan sat in seat 3A, not in first class. He had chosen that seat because he wanted to see the passengers around him, to hear their laughter and conversation, and to know that no one had to lower their head when stepping onto an airplane. A boy about 10 years old sat beside him, clutching a model airplane tightly. So the boy asked, eyes wide with wonder, "This flight is really special, isn't it?" Jordan smiled. "Yes, because today we're not just flying into the sky, we're flying through the past. Through the past, that's right, so we never forget what it taught us." The boy nodded, not fully understanding, but feeling the weight of the words. As the plane began to taxi, Captain Olivia Ramirez's voice came through the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are not just departing from Atlanta to Seattle. We are departing from prejudice to respect." Applause filled the cabin, soft but profound, like a quiet promise shared among people who had weathered a storm and were learning once again to believe in the sky. Jordan looked out the window. The sun was rising, its light spilling across the billowing clouds. In that moment, he could almost hear his grandmother Evelyn's voice echoing from afar. "Fly, my boy. Fly, but never forget those who are still standing on the ground." He smiled and whispered in his heart, "I haven't forgotten, Grandma. I'm bringing them with me." At 30,000 feet, Jordan opened his laptop and began typing the first lines of the book he had promised, Laura Chen, The Sky Does Not Discriminate. He wrote, "Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or laws. It comes from a camera, from a voice brave enough to speak, and from ordinary people who choose not to look away." Each word he typed carried a memory: Kara's eyes, Monica's tears, Olivia's smile, and the nods of those who had once been told they didn't belong. When the final line appeared, Jordan paused and gently closed the laptop. Outside, the sun had risen fully over the horizon, brilliant and unobstructed. The Skybridge A350 touched down in Seattle to the sound of thunderous applause. As passengers disembarked, they carried not just their luggage, but a rare feeling, the feeling of being seen, of being respected. Jordan was the last to leave the cabin. He turned back, looking at the empty seats where sunlight streamed in, casting golden beams across the aisle, like unseen hands resting on his shoulders. He whispered softly, only for himself, "Grandma, I flew for you for my father, and for everyone who was ever told they didn't belong in this sky. Now everyone has a seat." He stepped down the staircase and took a deep breath. Above him, another Skybridge aircraft lifted off, leaving a thin, white trail stretching like an invisible sentence written across the heavens, "We all fly together." Jordan looked up and smiled. The sky was no longer a limit. It was a promise that when dignity is preserved, humanity will always find a way to take flight, no matter where the journey begins. Late afternoon, the North Star Holdings headquarters on Lexington Avenue glowed under the amber light of sunset. The windows on the 72nd floor reflected a sky painted in gold, where dozens of planes bearing the Skybridge logo lined up for landing. In that quiet expanse, Jordan Ellis sat alone in a vast conference room, gazing down at the bustling streets below. 3 years had passed since the day he was stopped at the door of first class. The world had changed, but what made him proud was not the new laws or the financial numbers, it was the people. Since the Aviation Equality Act was passed, the number of black and female trainees entering aviation had quadrupled. Training videos on customer respect had become standard protocol. A whole new generation was growing up believing that dignity never needed permission to exist. Jordan opened a small notebook. Inside were photographs. Monica Reed in her suit as Director of Customer Experience, Captain Olivia Ramirez wearing her golden pilot wings, now the first woman to command Skybridge's intercontinental fleet, and Ava Monica's daughter in her flight school uniform, her smile radiant with purpose. He turned to the last page, a black and white photo of his grandmother Evelyn. Her eyes in that picture were as kind and proud as ever. "Grandma," he whispered, "the sky you once pointed to. It's open now for everyone." That evening, Jordan attended the Humanity Leadership Awards, where he was being honored for his contributions to equality and corporate ethics worldwide. When the host called his name, The audience rose, the sound of applause, rolling like waves. Jordan stepped onto the stage without a prepared speech. He simply smiled and waited for the noise to fade. "Thank you," he began, his voice calm and resonant. "I don't accept this award for myself. I accept it for everyone who was ever told they didn't belong somewhere. They are the reason I keep flying." He paused, scanning the crowd. 3 years ago, I was asked to leave a first-class seat because of procedure. Today, those who were once excluded from that cabin are the ones flying the planes, serving the passengers, managing the airlines, and leading the next generation. That isn't a miracle, that's the power of change. The lights shimmered on his silvering hair. Jordan lowered his tone, each word carving itself into the air. Justice is not a single act. It's the habit of courage. And courage is not reserved for those in high places. It belongs to anyone brave enough to say, enough. Because when you stand up for what's right, you give someone else wings to fly. The hall was silent, then erupted into thunderous applause. Many in the crowd were in tears. When the night ended, Jordan left the hall and walked alone through Bryant Park. The city glistened after a light rain, the reflections of 1,000 lights sparkling like stars fallen to the ground. He stopped and looked up. High above, a sky bridge 7-8. 7 ascended, leaving behind a thin white trail, like a brush stroke of hope. Jordan smiled, raising his hand in salute. "Fly," he whispered, "and don't just carry people, carry their dignity." The plane grew smaller, disappearing into the clouds. But for Jordan, it was never truly gone. It was only continuing its journey, carrying everything he had sown. He turned and walked on his silhouette, blending into the glow of the city. Behind him, the sky remained bright, not because of the stars, but because compassion had been awakened. And somewhere in that endless expanse, his grandmother Evelyn's voice echoed softly like a breeze. "You've done it, Jordan. But don't stop for justice, like the sky will never have an end." Jordan smiled faintly and replied, "I know, Grandma. Humanity's flight is still ongoing." He kept walking, leaving behind a sky no longer divided by class. Only one single flight remained, carrying one shared name: we fly together. From the perspective of a leadership ethics expert, Jordan Ellis's journey is not just the story of a flight, but a test of how humanity chooses to use power to exclude or to connect. Because true justice doesn't live within written rules, it exists in the small choices we make when faced with unfairness. And perhaps the greatest form of power is not sitting in first class, but making sure everyone is seen as equals. If you believe the world needs more people who have the courage to stand for what is right, please like this video to spread that message. Subscribe to our channel to continue exploring stories where dignity is tested by power, and comment below with the phrase that reflects your belief: "Hold your dignity."